So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Vanya. Okay, so hi, my name is Rika. I'm currently a lecturer at the University of Manchester, but the work that I'm going to be presenting was actually part of my PhD research. Um, but that being said, once I started working for this presentation, I started exploring new things. So a lot of it will end with questions rather than concrete findings, but you'll sort of see why. So what I was looking at for my PhD is using crowdsourced data in order to learn more about concepts relating to people's perception of crime or people's perception of place. But also, I found this particular data set, and I thought that potentially it could also represent a form of guardianship that people are carrying out while they're sort of generating these data. So the general premise here, or that I want to sort of convey, is that these crowdsourced data, so data that is generated through websites or applications that people are using, it can be used to represent where people are moving about in their environments and where they might be monitoring these environments and potentially acting as capable and intervening guardians of the spaces where they are. So what do I mean by crowdsourcing? So crowdsourcing is a term coined by Jeff Howe, initially in an article in Wired magazine, but then he wrote this book and it sort of took off. And it's a fusion word between the words of crowd and outsourcing. And you can basically start putting together from that what this is it's a distributed mode of production for one project where lots and lots and lots of people come together to contribute to create a sort of final output, right? So it's not something where you hire a team to work on it or you hire people to do particular tasks, but actually many people contribute, and it's this sort of sum of that becomes this final output. And it's really made possible to the scale that we're talking about here by the internet and by people using the internet and being able to come together in sort of online space to work together on something. So this is sort of the more formal definition here. So crowdsourcing is essentially harnessing information and skills from large crowds in order to bring it together to a collaborative project. And I think the most obvious example that some of you are probably already thinking about is Wikipedia, right? So I'm assuming everyone in the room has heard of and widely used Wikipedia. But if you're not aware of how it's produced, many people are contributing knowledge to this online encyclopedia, and it comes together as a whole, and people moderate it, and there's discussions around it. And all that kind of thing. So actually, I'll return to this later, but who's used Wikipedia? Who's contributed to Wikipedia? Okay, so there's actually, so proportionally, this is a much higher representation of contributors than the wider population. I'll return to that, but that's really good to know. Who's gotten into arguments on Wikipedia discussion forums? Yeah. Another example is Flickr. So for anyone who hasn't used Flickr, you basically, it's a website where you can upload your photos and you can share it with your friends and family. So for example, my mom's really into taking photos of birds, so she'll upload all her bird photos on there and link them all to me and my brother. But the cool thing about Flickr is that you can tag your photos, and the tags that you assign to your photos, it allows for the indexing and therefore your ability to search these photos. So what I can do if I'm coming here to give a presentation in Stockholm and I want to know what Stockholm looks like, I can type in the keyword Stockholm, and I get all of the images that are tagged with this keyword, right? And I didn't have to commission people professionally to go take photos for me. I can just go on this website, search this term, and find out some information, right? So for example, for protests, you could probably put in the keyword or a hashtag or something like that. Maybe, I'm not sure if Flickr is the sort of protest-appropriate platform, but you could give it a go and see the very artistic, like nice angle, good filter kind of shots of your particular protest. But what's exciting about this is that we as researchers or as even as hobbyists or anyone interested in these kinds of data, we can make use of this, right? So we can apply our own sort of lens and interpret what we want and use this data instead of having to go out and collect our own data to draw meaningful conclusions from it. So a really cool example with Flickr are maps like these. So there's this guy's actually an artist, I think, and he's taken geotagged photos from Flickr. So those are photos with a latitude, longitude point of where it was taken. And he's mapped them, but he's also color-coded by whether the map was, or the photo was taken by a local person or a tourist. So red is tourist, blue is local person, yellow is we're not sure. So does anyone know what city that is? Yeah, it's London. So you can see tourists kind of tend to stay near the center, north, by the river. They definitely don't go south. There's a little bit east now. Definitely you can see Greenwich and things like that lighting up. But that's really cool, right? So this person didn't have to go out and ask tourists or geotag tourists or anything like that. They just made use of these data available. And I just put this in there as well, because anyone recognize that? Yeah, it's Stockholm. So you can see tourists kind of stay in the middle. You can see Old Town quite a lot, and then locals tend to go out more in the periphery. What is this route around there? Is that like some really nice cycling route or a boat route? I'm not sure, but that looks really nice and unexplored by tourists. So there's your opportunity if you're looking at off-the-grid things to see. But that's generally the idea behind crowdsourcing and how we can take these data, apply our own filter, apply our own research questions, and gain new insight from these. So mainly in research in criminology, these data are used to approximate the level of on-street population, so ambient population. So this is an example of a paper where they take Twitter data and they use use that as an estimator of potential suitable targets for a crime to occur. So they use it as basically an accurate denominator for calculating crime risk, right? So by looking at when and where people are tweeting, we can start guessing where they are or when they are on those streets and when people are potentially able to go there and rob those people, right? So we're trying to guess an accurate number of crime opportunities present, and these kinds of data provide an opportunity to do that. But the one question that I was asking is that it's potentially also important not just when and where people are when they're generating these data, but also what are they doing, right? What is the action by which they generate these kinds of data? And so, for example, if you look at this guy, he's kind of having his morning coffee and then tweeting away. And I don't know if this is a thing in Sweden, but in the UK currently we're having a huge spout of moped-enabled snatches, which is kids on mopeds going up on the sidewalk and taking phones out of people's hands. So this guy would be quite a suitable target for that, right? So the person can ride up on the moped, take their phone, and ride off into the sunset, right? So in this case, I would definitely say that this data point here is potentially quite a suitable target. But I think that that's something qualitatively different than the person in the other photo who's using their phone to sort of monitor their environment, right? So they have their head up and they're looking around and they're sort of aware and active and they're present in the environment which they're moving through. And they're actually almost taking an action, right? So depending on what they then do with that photo that they have taken, they could be potentially acting as a guardian of that space or as someone present in that space who isn't necessarily just a suitable target, but potentially a capable guardian in that space as well. So just because a person is there, depending on what they're doing, they might potentially act either way on increasing or decreasing a type of crime risk. What did I do with these type of data? Well, I found this online problem reporting website called fixmystreet.com. So Fix My Street is specific to the UK, but you have the equivalent in many, many, many other countries. I know that there's an equivalent in Sweden. I think if you literally translate the words Fix My Street, that's what it's called. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, because no. But essentially, it's a website where you can log on, put in your neighborhood or your home postcode, and it gives you a map of your area, and you can report something that's bothering you, right? So you're reporting environmental issues that you think that your local council should take some steps to address, right? So this is the web page. You go in there, you type in your area, and you make your report. So this particular report, someone left about an instance of a graffiti. And I just put it on here to sort of illustrate what this looks like and what kind of information we get, right? So there's, when you click on a report, it brings up this. So there's a point, which is your latitude, longitude of where this issue exists. You get a title. So in this case, they aptly titled it graffiti. It also gets categorized into one of the many drop-down available categories. You get a bit of description. So in this case, you can see the graffiti was offensive, and it was on a children's playground. So the person was like, oh, this is urgent, please remove it. And you get a photo. Right, so you get, this is basically the information available. There's also a time and a date of when the person made that report, and potentially a name. So this particular one, you'll see it was made, I don't know how the, no, my hand's way too shaky. So made anonymously, please find where it says anonymously. It's near the date. And so, but if the person does, decide to leave their name, you can get that kind of information as well. So that's quite cool. One of the sort of issues with getting access to these types of crowdsourced data. So Fix My Street, I don't know if I mentioned, but it's run by an NGO. So they don't have, it's a not-for-profit organization. They don't have a lot of staff and time and money and those kinds of things. So when I asked if, can I please have your data? They said, we'd love to give this data to you, but we just don't have the resources, the energy, the time to extract it for you. So what I had to do is actually scrape the data. So all I really did was write a quick script that opened up each web page individually. Luckily, they were all sequential. So this report would be fixmystreet.com/ I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then the next one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, et cetera, et cetera. So cycled through each one of them and collected all the relevant information here with the permission of the website owner. Once they said they can't give me the data, I said, can I scrape it? They said yes. So you can get the data that way. And it gave me a very rich set of data of what people are annoyed about in their neighborhood, but also, where are they annoyed by it, what times, and a little bit from the name who they are, and what they're annoyed about, that kind of stuff. So I thought that was some very, very interesting data, so I wanted to look into it. The majority of complaints are about litter. So that seems to be people's main concern. But I'll be getting things like that. So there'll be a photo, and there'll be a comment about why this person is annoyed by whatever it is that they're reporting. The other exciting thing you get from that is location. So you can start actually mapping where it is that people are encountering things. So on first approach, I was looking at this as sort of where are people encountering things that are annoying. But if we consider the mode of production behind this data and frame it as somebody paying attention to their environment and monitoring it, these spots could also be highlighting where there's someone sort of roaming about going, okay, that doesn't look good, let's take a photo, let's report this, let's intervene. So why did I sort of go down this guardianship route? Well, I'm basically referring to all of Dr. Reynolds' work here, but luckily she's explained it all, so I don't need to go into what guardianship is. So my talk will be over soon. No, I'm kidding. So, but she devised these sort of levels of guardianship from the sort of people who are just available, or actually the people who are invisible, to the people who are actively intervening. And we saw it earlier with the sort of fun pictures of older people leaning out their windows, and they have this sort of scale of the preventative effect on crime, right? So basically, the more active the guardian person, the more effect they have on, or the higher their preventative effect is basically on crime. But in terms of data available to look at these, of course, there's the population estimates for the very basic ones. So census, for example, how many people live in this area, how many people are estimated to be in this area in the daytime. And in terms of the intervening, there's the observational measure of actually going there and seeing them and producing all the photos and having people yell at you and ask what you're doing when you're doing your field work. But as I'm talking about crowdsourced data and what crowdsourced data can offer us, I want to look at, okay, what if I'm too lazy to collect my own data and I want to see what's already out there? What can I use that for? So if we consider these crowdsourced data as a measure of ambient population, they can potentially represent not necessarily the invisible, but the available people, right? So if we consider that they're on the street. But it doesn't really say anything about their intent, their willingness, or their capacity to intervene. So what I'm hoping is that if we take sort of crowdsourcing crowdsourced data from a particular type or subset. For example, this problem reporting data, so where people are actually actively out there and logging, observing their environment and logging these issues. Those might be the people who are intervening, right? It might be that they're the ones with their head up, looking around, and with sort of heightened capacity compared to the guy just tweeting on his phone. Okay, so that's basically the question. So I think that this might be the case, and I can see why. But are these people on these apps, are they actually potential guardians or not? So to have a look at this, I took, as I said, I scraped through over 55,000 entries from London. Actually, I scraped through a lot more, but a lot of them didn't come through properly. Luckily, as I said, I got a script to do this. I didn't spend this, I don't know, approximately 10 years sitting and manually noting down every single thing on the page. And so I had a look at some of the data there. So as I mentioned, the majority of issues were about things like litter, pavement issues, and then things like potholes, graffiti, that kind of stuff. So these were the general sort of main categories that people's reports fell into. And as I mentioned, they're all things that have to do with the environment. And they're all things that the council would do something about. So I don't know if I said in the beginning, but whenever you make a report on fixmystreet.com, when you submit it, it automatically gets emailed to the relevant local authority. So if it's a transport authority, then to them. If it's the council, then to them, et cetera, et cetera. So you expect some sort of response and feedback on this. So one of the things that I wanted to look at, and we've spoken about sort of the bias of participation and all of that. So I wanted to look at how much people contribute. So I mentioned with the report, you can leave your name. So I only looked at people who've left their name, and I looked at the extent to which people contribute to this. And so this is something called a Lorentz curve. Apologies if you've already seen it, but basically what it does is it's usually used for mapping income inequality. And so down here, you can see the cumulative share of people that account for the thing. And up here, you can see the cumulative share of the thing. So you can see on the top, that's 100%. So when we get up here, that's basically 100% of the reports. So if you have a look at down here, you can kind of see before it gets to the first kink that this is a straight line. And what that means, see just basically just under 80%. And what that means is that for all these people, they only submitted one report. So it just goes up in 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. So you can see the majority of the people, just under 80% of the people who participate in Fix My Street, they just go the once, send the report, and then leave their name, right? And then you see a kink of people going 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, and then all of a sudden it starts spiking. So you see this like top small % of people accounting for the majority of the comments. So you can see there's some really, if we consider these guys accurate guardians, some really active guardians going on. Fix My Street to report things. And this is generally what you tend to see in all sorts of crowdsourced activities, right? So I asked earlier how many people contribute to Wikipedia. It was a surprise. It was not, what is it? Okay, 1%. Maybe, yeah, I think it was a little bit over 1% who raised their hands here. So, sampling error and so on. But so we heard earlier about the Pareto principle of the 80-20 rule, that 20% of street segments account for 80% of calls to service to police. Here you get like the 90-9-1 rule on Wikipedia. But then you get like even much smaller, yes, and then on Wikipedia you get the basically 99.8% of us are lurkers. We just go there for the articles. Those are all our students basically mining their data for their essays. Then you have the 0.2% who are occasional contributors. I would say, I occasionally do that. And there's 0.0003% are the people who are basically contributing most of the content of Wikipedia. Isn't that amazing? 0.003%. For all of that knowledge. I think that's kind of cool. But yeah, so we kind of see that replicated in the top contributors to Fix My Street as well. So I wanted to look at like, okay, what does the top 1% look like? So this is just a bar chart of the number of contributions by people who are in this top 1% group. And you can see even there's outliers. The majority of the top 1%, they do like between, I don't know, I think it's like 50 to 20 reports, and then there's still outliers. I'm like, okay, what's the top 0.1% look like? And even in the top 0.1%, okay, it's a bit better, but there's still some outliers. So I've got 3 years worth of data. So does anyone want to guess how many contributions come from that guy? In 3 years, how many reports do you think they sent? Anyone think it's more than 500? No? One person more than 500. You've won. Oh, okay, there's a few more. So this person up here contributed 800 something reports. Yeah, and it's not, so I checked to see if it's maybe an organization, so if it's like something council. No, it's a person with a name. So that's, they've really gotten into Fix My Street. So I thought that this was really interesting in sort of seeing the extent that people go about guarding their environment in these data. So the other thing, sorry, I realize that this is confusingly titled, but I'll explain it in a moment. The other thing I wanted to look into is, so are these super contributors, are they sort of fixed on one thing? So is one person like the graffiti warrior, or are they the pothole warrior? Or do they sort of have more of a range in terms of what they report about? So this is the top 1% group again of contributors, and I just looked at the number of categories in which they made reports. So there was 21 people, so that's 4% of this top group, who only made reports in one particular group, right? So they're specific to that category. But the average, so the mean and median are pretty close. The average is about 6, right? So most people go between 6 categories, and you've got your highest person who's 15 across, is completely category agnostic. But the other thing I wanted to say about this one, so people who submitted in only one category, 13 out of this 21, their category was miscellaneous or other. I don't remember what it's called, but and we all know that that other group isn't really a group because you get lumped together very different things into it. So I would, based on this, say that these super contributors, they monitor the whole environment. And because of that, it's possible that they pay attention not only to disorder, but potentially other things that they're not reporting on Fix My Street, but that would require, for example, a call to the police instead. But I have no data to back that up. That's just my own interpretations of these data. The other thing I wanted to look at is how far do these super contributors go? Are they sort of local? Do they stick to their area? Do they move around? And I haven't done any sort of proper analysis on this, I just kind of plotted it to see. But it does seem like, so each one of these is a report submitted by a person. It's colored by the person who submitted it. And you can see the light colors sort of clustering together. People tend to do it as they go, so you can see lines, for example, with that guy. So, every color is yep. One person. Yep. I think the colors are not super easy to tell apart often, so that'll be like a slightly lighter shade of green. But I think the greens will be so like that yellow will be different than a yellowish looking thing somewhere here, if that makes sense. But you can generally assume, I connected it with lines, but it looked horrible. But yeah, it's as my sort of exploratory non-scientific diagram of people contributing. They tend to do it as they go along, right? So in their activity space, people seem to be covering everything with reports. They don't, or yeah, as much as we can see from these. Right. Okay, so do these Fix My Street guardians have a preventive effect on burglary? So we spoke, or basically everyone before me covered this. So the role of a guardian is that they have this sort of preventative effect on crime when they're there, and also when they're not there, their absence might have a sort of encourage crime to happen, or make it possible for crime opportunities to occur. So I wanted to look, and I looked at burglary in particular because, as we saw earlier, residential burglary has a sort of daytime peak. And so I was looking at when guardians are present in the daytime versus not present in the daytime. And the way that I tried to sort of conceptualize these Fix My Street data, so FMS just stands for Fix My Street, is on the one hand, you have this sort of willingness to intervene measure on a neighborhood, and that's the theoretically how willing people are to intervene, and that's the one traditionally measured with questionnaires, where you get asked, if there's kids doing bad stuff, do you think your neighbors will intervene, and similar questions, and you get an aggregate score based on everyone's answers to that within your neighborhood. So that's that sort of abstract, in theory, people are likely to intervene in this particular neighborhood. And then on the other side of that spectrum, you have the ambient population. So that's just like humans present, bodies present on the street. And we don't know the extent to which they're willing or not to intervene, but we know that they're there. So I'm positioning this Fix My Street data sort of in between the two. And I wanted to look at the effect that that has on burglary. So as we said, if there's an absence of guardians in the daytime, then that should be, that might open some places up to being more vulnerable to crimes happening that tend to occur in the daytime. So on the first instance, I just mapped the population change based on actual population change, so the difference between daytime and nighttime population as measured by the census, and then the difference in people reporting stuff on the Fix My Street app. So the difference between daytime reports and nighttime reports versus the difference between daytime people and nighttime people. And you can see sort of central London gets really dark because there's an increase of people in the daytime because people go here to work, whereas sort of the outer boroughs, they get light because people leave here when they work, right? So an orange is an increase and a yellow is a decrease. And you can see sort of central London and town centers light up because you get more people. Very interestingly, this pattern is not present in the Fix My Street data. And I'll return to sort of bias in the data in a bit, but mentioned earlier that old people are the best guardians, right? So people who are potentially retired, they might not be going to work. So it does sort of make sense for them to not follow the daytime routine activities of people going into the central zones where they're working, but instead going somewhere else in the daytime. So I thought that that was already quite interesting that we're getting a different pattern with the two data. But onto some actual results, and I'm sorry, these are tables literally copy and pasted, which I know I shouldn't do, but I put animations on it, so that makes it slightly better. So essentially, what I did is I built a model where I'm trying to predict burglaries using these different data that I described earlier, the willingness to intervene, the Fix My Street data, and the population data. And so my first model, you've got just willingness to intervene, and we can say that it's significant and it has a negative coefficient, so yay, it reduces crime, but it's quite a small coefficient, and my model diagnostics are not the greatest. Then I add population to the model. Interestingly, so still significant, but my coefficient is very, very close to 0. And that actually is an artifact of my data and my outcome variable, but I'll mention that again in a moment. The model improves slightly, but it's still not super. And then when I add the Fix My Street data, I get a negative coefficient, but it's not significant, and it's, again, still super close to 0. So my results are not the best. I took out the population and just the daytime change with the willingness to, daytime change in Fix My Street reporting with willingness to intervene, see if that makes any sort of difference. It does not. So what does that mean for my question? So can crowdsourced environmental monitoring data represent the movement of active guardians? I'm gonna go with a maybe. Because I really hyped myself up and convinced myself with all the previous slides all up until my ugly table. So there's a reason I kept them ugly. You forget that slide. But I cannot support that at this moment. I do want to say, is that my next, I want to talk about biases, so I'll come back to it. So by outcome variable of burglaries, which I thought was residential burglaries, near the end of the study, I found out was all burglaries. So there's absolutely nothing to indicate that they're actually happening in the daytime, and I don't have the temporal resolution on the data. available to me. So I have by month. I don't know when they happen. So I'm currently looking at some open US data, because the US is still quite good at open data for now, I think. To try and replicate this, but that's why I'm holding out the maybe. Maybe it's because of my data. Maybe an interesting subgroup analysis will reveal results. But we'll see. And that's one of the questions that I wanted to say as well, is like, did I convince you that this is a possible explanation for this data, or am I really just trying to put a round peg into a square hole? The other really important thing about this is biases. I didn't hugely go into this, but who partakes in these kinds of crowdsourcing projects? When do they do this? Who has the means? Who is not represented? So if we start measuring guardianship using this kind of data, what kind of guardianship are we not measuring, right? There's tons and tons of people doing great things who just don't use this particular outlet as a way of doing that. So there's always that to be kept in mind. And there's a concept called service slanting. So if we were, for example, to use this data to consider where there's potholes or where there's graffiti, we might actually be tasking services to whoever is shouting the loudest rather than where there's actual issues. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't use this data, because this data is really cool, but it does mean that we need to be cautious about what it means and how we interpret it and what kind of lens we apply to it. So that's what I said about my crime data. And also I quite like the exploring the super guardians and what they do. And I didn't really have time to get around to it when I was doing my PhD, but I'd be very happy to sort of revisit it. And I do have all of this data available for all of the UK for 3 years, and I've got the code to scrape it again for other places that might have this, and I'm very happy to share it. So if anyone's got any sort of interest, questions, would like to have a look at it, anything like that, just get in touch, and I'd be super happy to explore further. So yeah, so that's me done, and thank you.
Excellent. Questions?
My question is about the elderly people. They made like perfect guardians in the analog world, but if you have anything to say, how is their interaction with the technology? Because we would assume that that they are not really familiar with this kind of applications and Fix My Street. If you have data on that, and what's going to happen once either the elderly get into the technology or the owners get old and have more time to. Okay, that's a bit prejudice, but yeah, you got my question.
Yeah, I get the gist, and I think you're not wrong. So the thing about crowdsourced data is that we don't have all the variables that we'd want to collect, right? So I would love to have demographic information on who's reporting. All I have is the names of the people when they decided to leave a name. However, that is a starting point. So there's some researchers in the UK who try and reverse engineer demographic information from names. So they can get age from first names, because there's general trends in what people name their babies, right? So you can get an approximate probabilistic age for I mean, I don't know how accurate that is in Sweden, but so this data was for the UK, but if your name is sort of Ethel, then you're likely to be over, 65. And if your name is, what's the new baby, George, then you're, all the babies being born currently have the same name as the royal baby. So there's these sort of trends, so you can reverse engineer that. I did that in my thesis for gender. So I tried to have a look at gender differences in reporting, and you can do it for age. I didn't have time, but it's possible to look at the age of people reporting. One thing that I did find when I was going through the names, when I was trying to get gender, is there was a couple when the report was made by someone on behalf of and it was a name like Gertrude, or like it's like a name that is not super popular now, but was potentially popular a while ago. So an older person's name, basically, and so that was quite interesting in terms of the debate around use of technology, right? So it might be that this lady Gertrude, she's not super into technology, but she's really annoyed by that pothole outside, and she's got a granddaughter or a carer or someone making that report on their behalf. So that I thought that was an interesting way of getting around to it. But a final point is that I think with applications and so things like tablets, from super anecdotal evidence, older people like tablets and they engage with apps and tablets a lot more than they do with PCs and web applications. So if it's like an app reporting, then that can sometimes help. And then as your comment on the people who are currently tech literate aging into reporting stuff on I mean, I report stuff now that it exists, but yeah, people aging into that active reporting stage. That'd be really great because we'd get a lot more data and we'd see that. But yeah, it's possible to look into age, but I didn't do it.
The super users of this system, did they report from all over London or from a small part? Could you see that?
Yeah, so they tend to stick to their own areas. I mean, I don't know if London's the best example for this because London is absolutely huge. And so I lived there for 6 years. And I basically went here because I lived here, and then I started, I worked here. I lived here in the east, and then I started working here. So over that, I basically went here. And then I was in West London recently, and it was a different country. So I don't know if London's the best example, but from the data here, people tend to stay local. So I haven't seen people go outside of their borough. So a borough would be like a bigger district. So there's 32 boroughs in Greater London. So you can kind of split it up like a clock, and they don't go much further than that. I have seen people reporting in their home and in their work. So if they live here and work here, there'll be like a blob of reports there and there, but they wouldn't go to, I don't know, somewhere there. So there wasn't really cases of isolated one-off reports in certain areas. So the specific answer is not really.
And I think the senior citizens today, they are getting better and better to use modern technology.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as time goes on, I had, I think I took it out, but there's sort of a slide on internet usage and internet-enabled mobile phone usage, and it is going up and up and up and up. So this, data is only getting more, or these kinds of activities are getting more saturated, so we can get sort of better data. Thanks.